Sometimes it feels like we're collectively waking up into a storm. Everyone's talking about burnout, anxiety, identity loss, disconnection from purpose. And not just in quiet corners of the internet anymore. It's in headlines, therapy sessions, TikTok feeds. Something's unraveling, and it's not just you, not just your friends. It's global. And here's the haunting part. A Swiss psychiatrist born in 1875 may have seen it coming. Carl Jung. Long before self-care routines, wellness apps, or Instagram therapists, Jung was already whispering warnings about what happens when a society loses touch with its soul. And now, it's like we're living in the shadow of what he tried to tell us. But this isn't a dry academic theory, and it's not just psychology trivia. What Jung saw, what he knew, was something primal, something that speaks directly to what you're feeling right now, whether you can name it or not. Let me show you how. First, a quick story. There was a time when people looked up at the stars and felt guided, not in a cheesy horoscope way, but genuinely connected to something bigger than themselves. Nature, myth, archetype. There was meaning woven into life. Fast forward to today, and the average person is staring at a screen, comparing their lives to strangers, numbed by expectations and aching for authenticity. We're overwhelmed with information, yet starving for wisdom. And that's exactly what Jung warned us about. He believed that when a society strips away meaning, ignores the symbolic, and replaces myth with materialism, something terrifying begins to happen. The psyche splits. We become fragmented, lonely, disoriented, and eventually mentally unwell. Not because we're weak, but because we're human, and humans aren't meant to be soulless. The crisis we're seeing today is not just about brain chemistry or bad habits. It's a spiritual crisis masquerading as a mental health epidemic. Jung saw it coming a century ago, and he tried to tell us, without a connection to the self, not the ego, not the curated persona, but the deep archetypal self, we lose ourselves entirely. And the world we've built is almost perfectly engineered to keep us disconnected from that self. But why? Why did Jung focus so much on myth, dreams, shadow work, symbols? Why did he say the gods have become diseases? Because he realized what we repress doesn't disappear. It transforms. It sinks into the unconscious and starts to control us from the shadows. When we ignore the sacred, when we neglect our inner world, it doesn't vanish, it explodes. And now we're sitting on the detonation. We're going to unpack that together. In this video, I want to walk you through how Jung's insights are more relevant now than ever. How our modern lifestyle, though hyper-connected on the surface, has left us spiritually bankrupt. I'll share examples that will probably feel eerily familiar. I'll show you why the very symptoms we're medicating might actually be messages, not from some mystical force out there, but from within, from parts of ourselves that are crying out to be heard. And most importantly, how Jung offered a path back. So, stay with me until the end, because we're not just talking about theories or spooky predictions. We're talking about you, about real tools, about how to reconnect with your own sense of meaning in a world that feels increasingly meaningless. And before we continue, If you're someone who loves expanding your mind, challenging the mainstream narrative, and exploring the deeper layers of life, make sure to subscribe to Fractal Wisdom, so you never miss the kind of insight that just might change the way you see reality. Now, Carl Jung didn't just work with dreams, he trusted them. In fact, he believed that dreams are messengers, not random brain static, but encoded truths from the unconscious. And it wasn't just about interpreting symbols, it was about restoring wholeness. Now pause for a second. In a world obsessed with control, hustle, and instant results, what place is there for dreams? Almost none. And that's the problem. See, Jung noticed something troubling in his time. Modern people were becoming too rational, too rigid, too disconnected from their inner lives. He saw an imbalance, not just in individuals, but in civilization. Everything was speeding up, becoming more externalized, more productive, but somehow more hollow. He called it the loss of soul. Today, we call it burnout, anxiety, nihilism. Different names, same root. Jung believed that when we stop listening to the unconscious, when we silence the symbolic language of the psyche, our inner world doesn't just go quiet, it fights back. Not with violence, but with symptoms. That fatigue that won't go away no matter how much you rest. That subtle dread that lingers even when everything looks fine. That sense that you're performing life instead of living it. These aren't just glitches in your brain chemistry, they're signals. And here's where it gets wild. Jung said that modern man was at risk of becoming a crowd of wriggling worms without any unity. His words, not mine. What he meant was this: if we ignore our inner world long enough, we don't just lose connection to ourselves, we lose cohesion. We dissolve into roles, masks, labels. We become strangers to ourselves. Now think about that next time you scroll for hours, barely conscious, jumping between personalities like costumes in a digital masquerade. Are we living or role-playing? That's what Jung feared most. Not madness, but meaninglessness. And that's the twist most people miss. He wasn't trying to fix people. He was trying to reintegrate them, to help them reclaim the pieces they lost, the rejected emotions, the forgotten values, the denied instincts, what he called the shadow. And it's not some creepy villain inside you. The shadow is simply the parts of you you've buried because society told you they were wrong or weak or shameful. But buried doesn't mean gone. In fact, what we repress becomes what controls us, quietly, from beneath. And when a whole culture represses the same things, you don't just get personal symptoms, you get cultural pathology. We're living in a time of collective shadow, collective forgetting, and collective suffering. But Jung didn't just leave us with a warning, he gave us a map. A process he called individuation, the journey of becoming whole. And that means learning to dialogue with your unconscious, your dreams, your fears. Not to silence them, but to listen. It's not easy, but it's deeply healing. And it starts with one radical act, making space for your inner world again. That's what this video is really about. Not just mental health, as symptom management, but mental wholeness, real inner work. And now, I'll walk you through how Jung believed modern life had created a false self, and how that illusion is behind much of the anxiety and depression we're seeing today. It's not just your nervous system that's overloaded, it's your identity that's been hijacked. And unraveling that might just be the most liberating thing you ever do. So, Let's talk about the mask. Not the playful kind, not the one you wear on Halloween. I mean the psychological mask, the one you wear every day without even knowing it. Carl Jung called it the persona. It's who we present to the world, the acceptable version of ourselves, the polished, predictable, polite version, the one that gets the job, wins the likes, avoids conflict, fits in. Now the persona isn't evil, it's actually necessary. We need some kind of interface to function in society. But here's the problem, and it's a big one. Most people think their persona is their identity. But Jung, he saw the danger of that confusion. Because when the mask becomes who you think you are, you forget who you actually are. And that, Jung said, is when the real trouble begins. You see, the persona is shaped by what society rewards. And modern society, let's be honest, rewards performance over presence, productivity over peace, surface over depth. So if you spend years polishing a persona that's optimized for approval, but hollow inside, eventually your psyche pushes back. Quietly, until it doesn't. And then one day, you wake up and think, who the hell am I really? That's not just a midlife crisis, that's an identity emergency. And it's happening earlier and earlier now. 20-year-olds feeling like their souls are suffocating. 30-year-olds with panic attacks at brunch. Because somewhere deep down, they know they've built a life on top of someone they've never actually met. This is what Jung meant when he said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And yet, facing it is the only way back to wholeness. Now here's where it gets even more real. When you identify with the mask for too long, something else happens. The real self, the one that is raw, alive, unpredictable and honest, gets buried. It doesn't vanish, it retreats into the unconscious. And in its place, there's emptiness, a kind of ghost life, functioning on the outside, hollow on the inside. That's the false self Jung warned us about, and society is full of rewards for the false self. Influence, applause, success. But it never satisfies, because the part of you that feels the satisfaction, the real you, has been left behind. It's like feeding a photograph and wondering why it's still hungry. And here's the twist. That false self, that polished mask, is often the source of the anxiety, not the solution to it. Because when your outer world is full of praise, but your inner world feels numb, that gap eats away at you. That's what Jung called neurosis. Not just anxiety or depression as standalone symptoms, but as signals of an internal contradiction. The psyche's way of saying, this isn't working. And here's where Jung was revolutionary. He didn't say, suppress the symptoms. He said, follow them. Like breadcrumbs, like messages from the deep. He believed symptoms are symbols, clues from the unconscious. And when decoded, they lead you not just to relief, but to truth. So the question isn't, how do I get rid of this anxiety? It's, what is this anxiety trying to tell me about who I really am? And that, right there, is a radical shift. Because now, mental health isn't about polishing the persona. It's about meeting the person underneath it. And yes, it's terrifying, because the real self is unpredictable. It's not always nice, not always safe, and not always what your family or followers want. But it's real. And that's the sacred tension Jung believed we were meant to hold. The integration of opposites, the light and the shadow, the mask and the soul. Not picking sides, but holding both. That's individuation. That's what healing actually is. Not becoming someone else, but remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that process is not a straight line. It is messy and non-linear, but it's alive, and it's yours. In a world addicted to quick fixes, individuation is the slow road home. But it's the only road that leads to wholeness. And now, we'll explore how Jung believed healing wasn't just personal, it was collective. That the modern mental health crisis isn't just about individuals who are broken, but a society that's lost its sacred center, and how your healing might actually be the world's healing too. Carl Jung didn't just see individuals as patients, he saw society itself as a patient. A collective psyche, confused, wounded, and drifting further from itself. And he believed something few psychologists dared to say out loud. What we call mental illness in the individual is often just a reflection of a much bigger sickness in the culture. When a society becomes obsessed with materialism, ignores the soul, and treats people like cogs in a machine, those who break down aren't failing. They're responding. They're the ones still capable of feeling what's no longer human. So if you've ever felt like your sensitivity is a curse, Jung would say, it's not. It's evidence that you're still alive in a world that's slowly forgetting how to feel. Jung spoke of a future where people would suffer not because of inner demons, but because of the collapse of meaning. He saw it coming. A time when people would feel more connected digitally, but more isolated emotionally. A time when people would confuse attention with love, efficiency with value, noise with knowledge. This isn't just some poetic theory. It is really happening. We are living in a mythless culture, a world that no longer speaks symbolically, dreams collectively, or honors the inner journey. And without myth, Jung said, the soul starves. That starvation doesn't always look dramatic. It looks like people who can't sleep, people who can't cry, people who are constantly achieving, but never arriving. It looks like addiction, like numbing, like despair in slow motion. But here's the twist Jung offered, the part that still gives me chills. He believed that when individuals begin the inner work of integration, they don't just heal themselves, they send ripples into the collective unconscious. Your healing matters beyond you. It's not selfish to do shadow work, to reconnect with your inner truth, to start saying no to what drains your soul. It's revolutionary. Because as more people do this, something shifts in the field, a kind of psychic rebalancing. Jung said, the world hangs on a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. He wasn't being dramatic. He meant that the fate of humanity doesn't rest on technology, politics, or economics. It rests on our ability to evolve psychologically, to become conscious. And that's not just meditation apps and journaling. That's deep work, confronting your own contradictions, learning to hold paradox, and daring to live from the soul in a world that rewards the mask. It means slowing down in a culture of speed, feeling deeply in a world of detachment, choosing truth over approval, depth over distraction. And yes, it's hard. But here's the gift. When you start living from a place of inner alignment, you become strangely magnetic. Not in a flashy way, but in an authentic, grounded, peaceful way. You stop needing to prove. You stop needing to chase. because you're no longer a performance, you're a presence. That's the real medicine. And Jung knew we wouldn't get there as a society until enough individuals were brave enough to start the journey inward. So maybe that's you. Maybe this whole video isn't just about Jung's predictions. Maybe it's a mirror, a message from your own unconscious, using this screen as a portal, reminding you that you're not broken, you're being called. And when you answer that call, not with perfection but with honesty, you don't just reclaim your mental health, you reclaim your soul. So take a deep breath. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just remembering something the world forgot. If something in this video hit home, if it made you feel seen or less alone in what you've been quietly carrying, don't keep it to yourself. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's one part of yourself you feel like you've had to hide just to get through the day? Let's talk about it. You never know who might read your story and feel a little more human because of it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Fractal Wisdom if you want more content that doesn't just inform, but transforms. We're not just here to talk. We're here to remember, together.